avoidants tend to have very predictable relationship histories. And those predictable relationship histories really stem from a predictable childhood. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start with dismissive avoidance. By the time dismissive avoidants get up there in age, especially 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, the majority of them have a pretty similar relationship history. Committing and maybe even marrying long-term to unhealthy, toxic partners such as narcissists, maybe longer-term relationships with other dismissive avoidants. And most of their shorter-term relationships are going to be with emotionally available partners, healthier partners, or maybe some anxious partners. And this is all because of their attachment wounds. This is a person that grew up with consistent childhood emotional neglect, usually in households that are pretty stable from appearances. Their basic needs were met: food, clothing, shelter, but their emotional needs were not. Now, the most common scenario for dismissive avoidant childhood is having one narcissistic parent and one dismissive avoidant parent, getting emotional availability from neither. But the narcissistic parent is extremely dismissive of emotions, shooting those down. And the narcissistic parent will put high expectations and demands on the child. And this is where that trigger of expectations comes from. They could never meet the expectations and demands of the narcissistic parent. Now, narcissistic parents do not view children in the traditional sense. They don't view them as independent, autonomous beings. What they view them as is extensions of themselves. The narcissistic parent gets narcissistic supply by proxy from the child. Narcissistic supply is the attention, adoration, validation, and power and control they feel entitled to. So they push their kid to success because when their kid succeeds, the narcissist gets supply. So for example, if the kid hits the winning home run in the baseball game, look, that's my kid. He hit the winning home run. He's amazing because I'm amazing. And because I'm amazing, my kid's amazing. So they really eat that up because when the kid does well, the narcissist gets a boost to their ego as well. So they really push their kids to success. But the child grows up feeling like they cannot meet expectations. And the narcissistic parent is very demanding and smothering because it's all about them. They are the ones who need to be catered to. So because of this smothering that really is lacking in nurturing, the child grows up to associate closeness with losing your independence and getting smothered. And the narcissistic parent dismisses the emotions of the avoidant child. So the kid grows up to fear expressing emotions because those had consequences. Fears confrontation because they'd get rejected. And fears expectations because they feel like they can't meet them. And fears getting too close to anybody because of the fear of rejection, that shame wound that they develop from that neglect, and also the association that getting too close means losing your autonomy. So, because of these wounds, healthy relationship behaviors are specifically what trigger dismissive avoidance. It's not familiar to them, and it requires vulnerability, and it requires closeness and commitment and all these things that trigger them. But when a narcissistic partner comes along, it feels emotionally safe to them. And that shame wound, that feeling like I'm defective, I'm not lovable, that comes from the personalizing of that neglect is really the driving factor here. Now, when they get close to a partner that is healthier, it triggers their fears because they fear that if they let somebody in and really lower their walls, their partner's going to figure out that they are defective and they're going to reject them and abandon them. But a narcissistic partner, well, they have their walls up. They are also emotionally unavailable. And they're very dismissive of emotions, which is appealing to the dismissive avoidant because they don't feel safe being vulnerable. It's a toxic relationship, but it's surface level. There's no threat of emotional intimacy in this relationship. And it's familiar since they grew up with it. So they feel comfortable committing to the narcissistic partner and staying with them for a longer period of time. Typically, that relationship will end because it's toxic, but they will tend to last longer with a narcissistic partner. Now, Sometimes they can commit and stay longer term with another dismissive avoidant partner because there's no threat of intimacy, but those end up becoming like roommates. The most common pairing for a marriage with a DA is with a narcissist. Yes, there are times where they can actually commit to an anxious partner or something of the sort, but those are the exception, not the rule. And typically, one narcissistic parent, one dismissive avoidant parent, although there are cases where it is two dismissive avoidant parents. But in most of the cases with two dismissive avoidant parents, expectations are not as much of a trigger, neither is the hyper-independence, because dismissive avoidant parents tend to not be so smothering and controlling. They're just more emotionally absent. All right, let's get into fearful avoidance. Okay, fearful avoidance. Fearful avoidance will have a very similar pattern to dismissive avoidance when it comes to their relationship history. Longer-term relationships with more toxic partners, such as narcissists, commonly marriages with narcissists, and shorter-term relationships with healthier, emotionally available partners. And this goes back to their childhood. Fearful avoidants were also on the receiving end of emotional neglect in childhood, just like a dismissive avoidant. But in addition to that emotional neglect, they had a more volatile childhood. Chaos, volatility, much more frequent divorces, broken homes, cheating spouses, alcoholic parents, sometimes capital T trauma, sometimes lower T. So due to the chaos and the volatility, they develop an anxious attachment style. But in addition to the anxious attachment style, they also develop a dismissive avoidant attachment style. They have both insecure attachment styles. It's called disorganized attachment. And they can fluctuate back and forth depending on the situation, even within the same relationship. So this factors into how they show up as an adult. They grew up in a more unhealthy environment. They grew up experiencing more toxicity. They too commonly had a narcissistic parent. Not always, but it's very, very common. A narcissistic parent may be paired with a dismissive avoidant parent, but more likely a narcissistic parent paired with an anxiously attached parent or a fearful avoidant parent. And they found that to be familiar. They found that comfort in familiarity. Now, the core wound of a fearful avoidant is different than the core wound of a dismissive avoidant. The dismissive avoidant's core wound is that defectiveness we talked about, that feeling of being unlovable from the emotional neglect. Now, the fearful avoidant, their core wound is betrayal, because in some way, shape, or form, their parents or caretakers betrayed their trust as a child. So they have this deeply rooted fear that relationships equals betrayal, love equals betrayal, heartache, pain. So their subconscious mind drives them to validate themselves, meaning they have this belief that love equals betrayal and pain, so they find partners that confirm it. They get drawn to narcissists. They get drawn to dismissive avoidance. Fearful avoidance, unlike dismissive avoidance, have deep emotions. They really crave intimacy. But the problem is they are searching out what is familiar, and that is the emotionally unavailable parent that they never got the love from. And what happens is from childhood, the fearful avoidance nervous system has been trained to find comfort and familiarity in toxicity. So when they meet a partner that's emotionally unavailable, they will get anxiety. Their subconscious is trying to warn them, but they will consciously confuse that with a spark and chemistry and think that there's a huge attraction towards this unavailable, unhealthy partner. So they will go into anxious mode. Their anxious attachment style out of their disorganized is triggered, and they're trying to earn the love from the toxic partner, and that relationship can last a long time. But when they get into a relationship with a healthy, emotionally available partner, it feels unfamiliar and it feels unsafe because it's unfamiliar. Plus, their subconscious, their nervous system will not be activated by this person because this person is emotionally safe. So they'll confuse it and think it's a boring person because there's no anxiety, meaning there's no spark and chemistry in their mind. And that betrayal wound will kick in. They'll wait for the next shoe to drop with the healthier partner, looking for any signs of inconsistencies that justify their urges to run away because they believe that betrayal is imminent. And they'll go into avoidant mode with a healthier, loving partner.